Just wanna be with you. Just wanna be with you.
Giving to your local church should be easy, and with Tithely, it is. Just download the app and securely register your credit or debit card. You're done. Now you can give during church services or anywhere else. Use Tithely to give a one-time gift or set up recurring donations. It's that simple. It's fast, secure, and easy to use. Tithely, the simplest way to give to your local church.
Together, we are creating a new future for the Valley because of your generosity. Your financial support is being used to produce content and create a loving community that is bringing hope to hurting people during the COVID pandemic and quarantine. Your giving equips Newsoul Ribera with tools to provide access to our services and support for people who can only meet with us by phone. Because you give, the hungry are being fed, and we've launched a winter warmth campaign to protect people in the Valley from the cold this season. With your help, in 2021, we're not slowing down, but ramping up a campaign to expand our digital reach to help and inspire more kids, students, singles, families, and seniors. Your giving is making a difference in the community. 1 Timothy 6:17-19 says, "Don't be full of yourselves and obsessed with money, which is here today and gone tomorrow. Go after God, who piles on all the riches we could ever manage. Do good. Be rich in helping others. Be extravagantly generous. If you do that, you'll build a treasury that will last, gaining life that is truly life." We have quick and easy ways for you to give. Online, newsoulribera.com. By text BLESS to 94000. By app, download the Tithely app. Or by mail, Newsoul Ribera, P.O. Box 574, Ribera, New Mexico 87560. To receive text updates from Newsoul Ribera, text Ribera to 94000.
We've all said or thought this before. I'm so glad he showed up in my life when he did. We've said, I'm not sure I would have made it through this without her, or I wouldn't be where I am today apart from them. Now, this one could go either way. The things that have made your life better, or maybe how those people have made your life worse. But all of us can think of individuals or a couple of people or a group of people who've shaped our lives and who we are today. As a pastor, as a church leader, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today without my mom and my dad. Professionally, I wouldn't be where I am today without a brilliant man named Dave, who was an extraordinary political strategist with years of experience that were so valuable. And he was so good at his job that leaders from both political parties hired him and valued his opinion. They respected and wanted his insight. For some reason, he gave me a chance. I was a 20-something-year-old kid who was fixing computers in the office and had no political experience. And I told him that I wanted a shot. And he let me sit down at the decision-making table, and he gave me real responsibility. He trusted me. He took a chance on me, and it changed my career and my life. Renee, now it may sound like I'm trying to be a sweet husband here, but I'm actually just being honest. My wife has changed my life. It's terrifying for me to think of where I would be today had I never met her. So think about it. Isn't it true for you too? Someone came into your life and gave you insight or encouragement, perspective, hope. Sometimes they bring correction, sometimes it's confrontation, and you didn't like it then, but you are so grateful for it now. So does anybody come to mind? Have you ever thanked them? Do they know the impact they've made on your life? We'll come back to that in just a minute. Today, if you've been tracking along with us, we are in part 4 of a series called The Essentials. It's the ingredients of a healthy faith. Today we're talking about proximity matters. And in this series, we've been talking about Jesus' agenda in the first century and in the 21st century for his followers. And that agenda was not that they would simply mentally believe or agree with ideas or true things that he said. Instead, Jesus was looking for followers that had gritty, real world, all-in faith. Not a faith that's in our brains or down in our hearts, but that it would be active every day. That faith is best summed up by 2 words Jesus spoke to his first century followers. Follow me. He invited his followers to act and react in a different way than their instincts told them to. For many of them, it was the opposite way than how they were raised and how everyone else around them lived. Jesus never changed his invitation, but parts of the church, maybe the church you grew up in, altered his invitation from follow me to believe in me. Believe in me, it doesn't really change how you live. You can believe and remain the same kind of person you've always been. Jesus' invitation to follow him requires you to change and do life differently. You live differently because you trust God. When we say Christianity is about a relationship with God, what we're talking about is trust. That we learned in the series that trust is the currency of a relationship. And if you ever lost trust, you know what I'm talking about. And we've talked about how trust in God grows, which, if you think about maybe you've made a decision to trust God at the end of an intense talk like this, or in a church meeting of some kind. But deciding to trust God and actually trusting God are two totally different things. They're as different as the decision to lose weight and actually doing what is needed to improve your physical fitness. This might just be the description of why you've lost faith or why you're losing faith. Because it's only when that decision turns into action by trusting Jesus and following his teaching that you experience God every day of your life. That's when the decision becomes real. That's when your faith comes alive. If you only try to experience God through religious rituals like attending church meetings or taking communion, listening to worship, or saying prayers and not actually following the teaching of Jesus, you will always need some new and intense experience to make you feel like you're connecting with God. Maybe you'll hear a pastor give a talk and say, wow, that made me feel really guilty. That was so good. I feel terrible about myself. I must be connecting with God. I'm not going to do anything about it, but that feels intense. But if you don't trust Jesus by literally following his teaching in your life, putting it into practice, the new and emotional experiences you have in worship and prayer, they may be new, they may be emotional, but they may not be an actual encounter with God. See, you and I, we've got a faith muscle. And just like you've got a bicep, if you don't exercise it, it never gets stronger or bigger. But maybe no one ever taught you how to use it, or maybe you were too afraid to try. But like we've talked about, if you listen to the words of Jesus but never put them into practice in your life, it's like looking in a mirror when you get out of bed in the morning, seeing how scary you might look. Maybe you don't, I do. And not doing anything about it. Just putting your slippers or flip-flops on and headed out the door. None of us would do that. Why? Because when it comes to our appearance, we're doers. We're not just believers or hearers. A faith that just believes and doesn't do creates a faith that is useless and pointless. That although you believe, your faith is feeble, frail, and fragile. Maybe this is your story or someone you know, where you don't really know how it happened or when it happened, but you just don't believe anymore. This is the reason that happens. If you don't exercise your faith, it just goes away. And Jesus invited people to live their lives with a bold confidence in God that says, what would I do if I was confident that God was with me? That every day you ask this question. You think, what would I do in my life right now, right where you're sitting, or laying down or standing, or however you're interacting with me right now? Not just what would I believe, but what changes would I make? What would I avoid if I believed God was with me? Who would I talk to? How would I work? Where would I go? That's what it looks like to walk by faith. So in the essentials, we're focusing on the 5 essential things God uses to fuel the development of enduring, unshakable faith. The kind of faith that shows up in the real world of your life, in my life, the kind of confidence in God that carries you through the challenges of life from childhood all the way to the end of your life. So far, we've learned that the first essential God uses to grow our faith is practical teaching. It's when our active faith intersects with God's faithfulness that our faith grows. When you talk to someone who has unshakable faith, They will always tell you about the time they learned how to do something with what they believed in the relationships and how they date, in their marriage, with their kids, their grandkids, with coworkers, with people at school, with their money, how they manage their health and their time. They will tell you their story, and some of you have this story about how they knew they needed to follow the leading of Jesus in their lives, but were afraid to do it. They didn't know how it would turn out. It didn't make sense to them. It sounded crazy, but they did it anyway. And their faith intersected with the faithfulness of God on the other side of that decision. And then God did something extraordinary in their hearts, in their relationships, and in the lives of others because they trusted Him. He did something that they'll never forget. That's how their faith grew. Last time, we learned that the second essential thing that God uses to grow our faith is personal ministry. And some of you have reached out to me in response to last week. And if you haven't, I would love to hear from more of you. Whenever you talk to someone with enduring faith, they will always tell you about the first time they stepped out of their comfort zone to serve someone else or someone else's in Jesus' name. They will tell you that they weren't prepared for it, they didn't feel adequate, but they knew they were supposed to do it. They were terrified, but they stepped out in faith and they served someone in Jesus' name, not knowing what would happen or how it would turn out. They tell the story of stepping into someone else's story, the life of a neighbor or middle schoolers or high schoolers, senior adults. Today, the third essential we're going to look at that God uses to grow our faith is providential relationships. People with enduring faith will talk about the person or people who invited them to church or small group for the first time. They'll talk about their neighbor who moved next to them and they were a Christian and it made them uncomfortable and nervous. But they found out that they were really kind and nice people, and then their kids started playing together, and eventually the kids started going to their church, and eventually the whole family came to faith. And they'll say, I don't know how to explain it other than it's like God dropped them into our lives at that exact moment. They'll talk about the day someone stepped into their story and everything changed. When you think of your faith story and you think of these people in your story, it's as if God placed them in your life at just the right time. In the moment, you didn't know it was a defining moment, but as you look back, you can see that it was as if there was divine intervention. For some of you, you've been on the other side of this, where you were the one who stepped into someone else's story and then everything changed. You were just being a good neighbor, a good friend, a good boss, a good coworker. You didn't know it then, but God put you in their lives at just the right time. We never know when it's happening. We only know in retrospect, looking back. Defining moments, they define you and I for good or bad. And they always involve other people. They involve some kind of relationship. Either I'm so glad I met them or I wish I had never met them. So we shouldn't be surprised that providential relationships is one of the things God uses to grow our faith. I want you to think about it. Think about the gospel and what the gospel is really all about. It's how Christianity began, through providential relationships. God sent His Son into the world. He came as one of us to interact with us, to change us. That's the gospel. So if you've been around church for a while, you know this phrase, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. For ages, all humanity had were words from God. But God was revealing who He was to humanity with just words at that time. The Torah, the law of Moses, the words spoken by the prophet. But then God decided to do something new and something different. He sent His Son, the Word, into the world. The Word, God's Son, put on flesh in the person of Jesus, and then He began not just teaching or preaching, but actually intersecting with the lives of people. And anybody whose life intersected with Jesus, it was a defining moment for them. It was clearly a providential relationship because Jesus had been sent from God. And then those people began intersecting with the stories and lives of other people. And then those became defining moments in their lives too. Here's an example. Jesus comes to a guy named Philip and he says, "Follow me." Instead of just saying, okay, Jesus, I'll follow you, Philip does something different, something that usually doesn't get a lot of attention. He says, Jesus, okay, but I need you to wait here for just a bit. And then Philip goes and gets his buddy Nathanael. He says, Nathanael, you're not going to believe this. We have met the Messiah, the one we've been waiting for. Nathanael was like, sure you have. You haven't met the Messiah. Get out of here. We've been waiting for the Messiah for hundreds of years. Who is this Messiah? Philip's like, no, seriously, it's Jesus of Nazareth. Nathanael's like, Jesus of Nazareth? Okay, that's your mistake right out of the gate. The Messiah doesn't come from Nazareth. He says, Nazareth, can anything good come from there? So Nathanael disses Jesus' hometown. He's clearly not interested in following Jesus. And Philip, if he were like us, he would have said, okay, Nathanael, fine. If you want to go to hell, if you want to have a little insignificant life, fine. I'm going to go follow Jesus and it's going to be awesome. I'm going to heaven and we're going to go change the world. My name's going to be in the Bible and your name's going to be nowhere. That would have been the logical thing to do. Hey, Nathanael, I gave you a chance. For the rest of your life, you're going to look back and wish you would have responded to my invitation. You're going to say that you should have bought Google stock and that you should have come with me to follow Jesus. But now you missed it. But the incredible thing is, Philip doesn't do that. Instead, Philip doesn't give up. He says, I don't know about the Nazareth thing, Nathanael, but why don't you just come and see? Philip almost allowed Nathanael to miss it, but instead, he says, I can't answer your questions. I don't have the words to explain it. I just know that something has happened to me by meeting Jesus, and you need to just come and see. And Nathanael ends up thanking Philip for the rest of his life. He got a courtside seat to see what God was doing in the world. He saw the salvation of the world. He experienced the incredible things Jesus did. And when he did, I'm sure he went to Philip and said, I am so glad you didn't give up on me. I almost missed it. Now, some of us try to force people to trust Jesus or try to create defining moments in the stories of the people around us. But we can't create it or force it. What we can do is to be proactive in the stories of every person around us. The Apostle Paul said that some people plant, some people water, some people harvest. They gather the seeds in. Some people plant a seed, some people water, and some are there at the end. He means that God is at work in the lives of people around you, even though you can't feel it, even though you can't see it, just like he was in your life and he was in my life, even when I was even thinking about God. And then someone planted a seed of faith in your heart. They probably didn't even know it. And some other people watered it, maybe with kindness or encouragement or just listening to you being a friend. And then someone was there at the end when you were ready to step across the line of faith and trust Jesus with your life. You know, maybe we all want to be there for the harvest, I guess. But Paul says that it's God's work in the lives of other people, not ours. But we all have a part to play. Another way we can and should be proactive in developing providential relationships is to get into relationships with people whose faith informs their decision and whose faith shapes their lives. Why? Because being in proximity with people like that is how your faith grows, because of who you are doing life with. The writer of the book of Hebrews in the Bible, it's actually more like a long sermon, is writing to people who are on the verge of losing their faith in Jesus. And he writes this to them. He says, let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. Life was really hard for them, and they were tempted to let go of their hope. And they were wondering if following Jesus was worth it. In this verse, he's saying that if they let go of their hope in God, then where would they place their hope? In themselves? In science? In the government? In other gods or other religions? This was written in the first century where there were people alive who had actually seen Jesus after he rose from the dead. He says that the God who raised Jesus from the dead is trustworthy. So he writes, and let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. He says, I want you to think about how you're going to maintain your faith. You are going to need other people, and other people are going to need you. He says, I want you to help each other out, live out your faith. I want you to encourage each other to get more knowledge, to have more spiritual experiences. No, he says, I want you all to think about how to inspire each other to get really good at loving each other. I want you to challenge each other to do good deeds. Why? Because that's what following Jesus is all about. And when your faith intersects with God's faithfulness in the real world, your faith gets bigger and stronger. And what he says next was probably the most texted and emailed verse to pastors all over the world in 2020, when a global pandemic disrupted everything. He says, not giving up the meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another. There it is again. There were some people he was writing to who had developed a habit of not meeting together with other Jesus followers. And maybe some of you, or those you love, have developed this habit lately. Why? Why is he saying this? Why does this matter so much? When it comes to your faith, that is actually doing those things you feel nudged inside to do. When it comes to you experiencing the reality of God in your real-time, everyday life, proximity matters. Proximity and relationship are faith builders. Now, what I'm about to say next may explain why you've lost faith or why you're losing faith. This may be your story. People drift away from their community of faith before they drift away from faith. People don't just hear something or read something or experience something and just go, that's it. I don't believe anymore. I'm done. That's not how it usually happens. People usually drift away from their community of faith first before they drift away from faith. People lose faith when they lose contact with people of faith. Being with people of faith or not being with people of faith has nothing to do with reality. You're smart enough to know this. In other words, God doesn't stop existing because someone stops believing. Does that make sense? This has to do with your faith. If I allow myself, or if you allow yourself to drift away from our faith communities, it's only a matter of time before we begin to lose faith because proximity matters. Watching God work in the lives of others strengthens our faith. You realize you're not alone. You see that you're not the only one who is or has faced the challenges that you're facing right now. So providential relationships, when we see God's faithfulness in someone else's life, it makes it easier to trust him with ours. When we see God's activity in someone else's life, when we see his sustaining grace in someone else, it's easier to trust him with our own life, especially when the storms of life come, as they do for all of us. At the beginning of this talk, I said that we've all experienced these unexpected, providential, out of the blue, boom, suddenly someone stepped into our story and changed everything relationships. But there is something that we can and should do to facilitate or put ourselves into the position to experience this faith fuel, these providential relationships. We have to stay connected. Staying connected to a community of faith grows our faith. It builds and sustains our faith. And this is huge. It positions you to play a role in someone else's faith journey as well. This is why when we meet in person, we serve food, really good food, and we have coffee. It's why we're sitting at tables in circles instead of rows. We actually have it on the walls in the building. Circles are better than rows. It's why we have people, when we're gathered together, answer questions and play the hot seat game. For those of you watching online, it's why we want you to engage with us, post comments, request prayer, text us. Let us know how you're doing. We want to connect with you. Newsoul Ribera is organized around providential relationships. Some of you are already starting to experience this in the connections you're making as you get out of your comfort zone, as you sit with new people, as you answer questions, you're beginning to open your lives to each other. We'll be starting a women's group soon, a recovery group, and a marriage group soon. And we want you connecting in as many of those groups as you can. Why? Not because you don't have enough to do. You're already very busy, I know. Not because you're a bad Christian if you don't, or there's a holiest person prize for the person who attends the most church-sponsored meetings. None of those things. It's because the more you do life with other followers of Jesus, the more you can experience their faith and they can experience yours. You know, of all the stories that are told about how people's faith grows, very rarely is it about the content of a talk like this or a message. More often, it's, he was so influential in my life in that moment, or she made a huge difference for me, or I don't know where I would be without them, or I'm so glad I had these people in my life because when the storm came, when my life blew up, they made all the difference. So we're going to continue to organize Newsoul Ribera in person and online in ways that encourage providential relationships, because providential relationships are one of the 5 things God uses to grow enduring, strong faith. And this simple invitation, come sit with me. A single invitation could position you as a catalyst in someone's faith story. If you're watching online, sharing this video right now, sharing it on Facebook or email or however, you could text it even. Or texting somebody and inviting them to watch with you, even hosting a watch party in your house. An invitation is sometimes all it takes to change everything for someone or for you. And you and I never know until later. An invitation for coffee or dinner or to join you on a walk, that could be all it takes for someone to rediscover their faith. Invite someone. Why not? When you make that awkward invitation, yes, even you online, and they finally show up and join you, and then later on they get baptized or they tell the story of how God is working in their life, do you know what will happen to your faith? It will get bigger, because that's the power of providential relationships. And it's one of the 5 things God uses to grow our faith. You never know what hangs in the balance of you having the courage to say something and invite someone. You've heard this before. Your friends influence the quality and direction of your life. The people you are doing life with right now impact the strength and the endurance of your faith. Why? Because providential relationships, when we see God's faithfulness in someone else's life, it's easier to trust Him with ours. When we trust God with our lives, we experience His goodness and His power. And that's how our faith grows. And what helps us do that, to trust God? Being around others who are also trusting God with their lives. It gives us the courage to trust God with ours. So here's the challenge for you. If in this past season you become unplugged from a faith community for some reason, you need to get reconnected. Even if it's a little awkward, you need to get reconnected for the sake of your faith and for the sake of the faith of people that you are connected to. If you know someone who needs to get connected, you should make that call. Send that text or message them. Write an email. You have no idea who needs a simple invitation. Here's what will happen. When you find the courage to make that invitation and then later they tell their faith story, they're going to talk about you. And who knows? When you tell your faith story, you may talk about them. Because God uses community. Proximity matters. When we see God's faithfulness in someone else's life, it's so much easier to trust Him with ours. And we'll pick it up right there for the 4th Ascension next time.
How I live for the moments where I'm still in your presence. All the noise dies down. Lord, speak to me now. You have all my attention. I will linger and listen. I can't miss a thing. Come on. 'Cause Lord, I know my heart wants more of you. My heart wants something new, so I surrender all. 'Cause all I want is to live within your love, be undone by who you are. My desire is to know you deeper. Lord, I will open up again, throw my fears into the wind. I am desperate for a touch of heaven. Whoa, 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 whoa. You're the fire in the morning, you're the cool in the evening, the breath in my soul, you're the life in my bones. And there is no hesitation in your love and affection. It's the sweetest of all. My heart wants more of you. My heart wants something new, so I surrender all. 'Cause all I want is to live within your love, be undone by who you are. My desire is to know you deeper. Lord, I will open up again, throw my fears into the wind. I am desperate for a touch of heaven. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Come on. So I open up my heart to you. I open up my heart to you now. So do what only you can. Jesus, have your way in me now. I open up my heart to you. I open up my heart to you now. So do what only you can. Jesus, have your way in me now. 'Cause all I want is to live within your love, be undone by who you are. My desire is to know you deeper. Lord, I will open up again, throw my fears into the wind. I am desperate for a touch of heaven. Come on, wherever you are, would you begin to lean in? Doesn't matter if you're in your home, the presence of God is with you. So come on, can we sing together?